The top causes of the Great War were militarism. Colonial rivalry had led to a naval race between Britain and Germany. This made the relation worse between both countries, which led to a dispute between Britain and France. The crisis before 1914. Between 1900 and 1914, there had been three major crises between the great powers. These crises exposed the difference between the powers and the hostility between them. The first two crises were about Morocco, and the last one about the Austrian annexation of Bosnia. And the last one was the assassination of Franz Ferdinand. In June of 1914, Franz Ferdinand, the heir of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, and his wife were assassinated in the Bosnian city. The assassin was Gavrilo Princip.
Characteristics of Great War. It affected civilians at home as well as soldiers in combat. They fight with trenches, mines, and barbed wire, and massive casualties. Also, machine guns and chemical warfare were introduced. The floors in the trenches were nothing but mud and water full with rats.
War guilt was one of the few decisions that were decided on the Treaty of Versailles. It was to be placed the blame for all losses received by the Allies in the First World War on Germany, and the treaty also specifically asked the Kaiser to be brought on trial. Military loss was for the German army, which was reduced to 1,000 men. No tanks, aircraft, or heavy artillery were to be manufactured for the German armed forces, and the German navy was reduced. The third one was the economic loss that meant that the German steel industry depended on the coal from the Tsar.
The consequences of Treaty of Versailles can be divided in four: territorial, military, financial, and general. As a territorial consequence, Germany had to give Alsace-Lorraine to France, Eupen and Malmedy to Belgium, northern Schleswig to Denmark, Holstein to Czechoslovakia, West Prussia, Posen, and Upper Silesia to Poland. Germany also returns all lands that were given in the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk and returned them to Russia. The League of Nations controls some territories which could be voted between staying with Germany or not. The consequences in the military were that Germany should reduce their army into 1,000 men, and not having tanks or air force. The financial consequences were that Germany lost territory in which they generated a lot of money. And finally, general consequences were that Germany accepted that they started war, Germany has to pay all the damage of the war, and there was a creation of the League of Nations. The characteristics of Great Depression is that USA is very poor. It is in an economic depression, and President Hoover doesn't know what to do. So people who had their money in Wall Street started to commit suicide because they have lost all their money. All this happened because of the Great War, which left USA very poor. Another cause was the stock market crash of 1929.
One of the causes was that Hitler wanted more power and wanted to dominate everyone, so the idea expanded to the totalitarian regimes. Two governments, one ruled by Mussolini and the other one by Hitler, they became totalitarians, so they as dictators decided to take power over most of the world.
What is totalitarianism? Totalitarianism is a form of government in which there is no freedom and the authority is the government. The term began with the dictator Benito Mussolini, with the term totalitario in the early 1920s to describe the new fascist state of Italy.
The totalitarian regime that we're going to talk about today is an island located in Asia. The island is called Japan. This totalitarian regime was in the years of 1941 to 1945.
Hideki Tojo biography. Hideki Tojo was born in 1884 in Tokyo. In 1937, he was named Chief of Staff of Japanese Kwantung Army. In 1940, he was appointed Army Minister in the new cabinet, and 1 year later, he was named Prime Minister of Japan. In 1944, he stepped down of his position as Prime Minister. In 1948, Hideki Tojo was sentenced to death by hanging.
The Japanese economy right now is not as good as they expected it will be with totalitarianism. The country is in struggle because of war. They use money just for the war and not for the good of the country.
Ideology. Japanese ultranationalism is very similar to German Nazism. It can be defined as extreme nationalism. An ultranationalist is usually extremely loyal to his own nation and hostile and racist toward other nations. Other examples of ultranationalists can be Hitler and Stalin.
Human rights. Some of the human rights that were violated were Article 1 that says all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. And during that time, people didn't were born free. They had to do and serve the government. Another one was Article 5. No one should be subjected to torture or to cruelty. During that time, people was tortured and treated with cruelty. Article 3. Everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person. People were killed if they go against the ideologies of the government, and they didn't have security because they could be killed in any moment.